Yeah, champagne's the worst wine in the world. Uh, you got to hand it to them, though. See, what Dom Perignon figured out, people had been, as soon as we had bottles, people have been fermenting in the bottle. That wasn't the invention. What Dom Perignon found out is that you could put a shit ton of sugar in that wine and it wouldn't re-ferment because the CO2 suppresses the fermentation. And so uh, the court of Louis XIV, the Sun King, went nuts for these really sweet, highly acidic, still regular white wine made from champagne is searingly acidic and has no flavor. It's totally bland and tart. It's horrible. But if you put a whole ton of sugar and some bubbles, well, now what you got is alcoholic 7 Up. And before atomic energy, we didn't have sterile filters until after World War II. So we didn't know how to make sweet wine except port and sherry and some of the real high sugar wines. But just for table wine, the only way to do it was with champagne, with the CO2 pressure that prevents re-fermentation. So that everything went along great. So we're talking about the sec, the dry champagne. That's what it means. Had 60 grams per liter of sugar. That's twice as much sugar as Sutter Home White Zinfandel.
Welcome, everybody, back to the Barrels and Brews podcast. I'm your host, Sean Trace, and I have a really interesting guest with me today. Would you like to tell people who you are and a little bit about what you do?
Sure. My name is Clark Smith, and I'm a winemaker in California. I started life as a MIT dropout in the 60s and wandered out to California, got a job in a liquor store. Back in those days, there were only 250 wineries in the United States, and we really didn't know what we were doing. California had only made port and sherry until the mid 60s. So we didn't know anything about making table wine, and we made a lot of terrible wine. Uh, but the industry's grown amazingly. Now we've grown from at that time 250 wineries. Now we have about 13,000, and there's a winery in every U.S. state. Average of about 100 wineries in every state. And so I've been kind of got in on the ground floor of developing. To me, science and art come together in a few places. One is music, and the other is winemaking, where
Mm.
it's really science in service to art. And so I've played around quite a bit with that. I've invented a bunch of processes that have made better wine in the world, and keep scratching my head about the unique attractiveness of wine as a well, it isn't really the way I do it. It really isn't even a beverage. It's wine isn't a thirst quencher. It's more. It's got more in common with the soulfulness of a great musical piece, and the
Mm.
alcohol's just kind of annoying. Uh, but it it's quite fascinating to me, uh, just how the human soul can connect with the land through the making of wine.
That's powerful. And you've been involved in wine since the 1970s. When you look back at that era, what did the culture of winemaking look like? And what did people fundamentally misunderstand about wine back then?
Well, there weren't very many people drinking wine. A
Mm.
lot of them, I think, World War II and the time after that, when a lot of the GIs were stationed in Germany and France and Italy, they got a taste for wine, and they came back here and California at that time really wasn't making uh, table wine.
Mm,
Believe it or not, the average alcohol of a California wine in 1960 was 18.5%. It was all port and sherry.
yeah.
And then by 1970 was only about 5% port and sherry. And the average
Mm.
alcohol was 11%. So it's a huge transformation that happened right about that time. Uh, so what that meant is that you everybody was a if you were into wine, you were kind of a geek, sort of a like it's sort of like the people that are into classical music. You
Yeah,
were
yeah,
kind of a throwback, and it was a really fun time because
yeah.
people got it about what the appeal of wine is. And since then, it's deteriorated into you know trying to chase uh, newbies in the market all the time that want to drink. Maybe they want to drink Cabernet Sauvignon, but they want to drink chocolate flavored, sparkling, sweet Cabernet Sauvignon in a can.
Oh,
And that's not what wine is about. So if we talk about where the future is headed, um, we had 26 years of unbridled growth, which meant we always had a bunch of newbies uh, that didn't really understand what great wine is about. And now they're exiting. They're going off to do something else. Maybe it might be craft beer or kombucha or hard seltzer or cannabis. And what's going to be left is the people, the geeks that really get it, like they were in the 70s. And I'm really looking forward to that.
One of the things that I think about is that I don't know if you can say people got into it for the wrong reasons, but I mean, I work in media and content in YouTube, and it used to be that people would make a YouTube channel because they had something to say. They had a reason to say it. Um, and then suddenly people saw, some of these YouTubers making these insane amounts of money. And they wanted to get rich and they wanted to get ahead and they wanted to I want to do that. I want to be able to, be famous and things like that. And what happened is that people got into it and the direction shifted. And what I think is happening, or hopefully will happen, is that it realigns, that we get a new direction that kind of comes together, But it's interesting too because one of the things that you said there is the how science and the art kind of play with each other, and a lot of modern winemaking presents itself as scientific and precise, you know. And I hear so much of that when people come on. But from your perspective, where has science improved wine, and where has it actually led people in the wrong direction? Because I mean, and one of the things too is like we've been making wine for thousands of years, and they didn't have the exact science that we have now. But I'm just so curious, like, is it making a real impact and difference, or do you feel like it can be a distraction too?
Well, there's a lot of different ways to answer that question, but you're right. Uh, Winemaking goes back at least 8,000 years.
Yeah.
And if you took a winemaker from any time during that period all the way up to the beginning of the 20th century, and you brought them forward today into a winery today, they wouldn't recognize it.
Mm,
Uh, you know, they didn't know anything about electricity or stainless steel or refrigeration or, plastics or inert gas. All the things that are in a winery today didn't exist back then. It was foot stomping and a lot
mhm.
of manual labor. Uh, and part of the problem, well, let me see. I mean, the good part is our wines are much cleaner than they used to be.
Mm,
Um, but maybe they're a little too clean.
mm,
So, for example, we've made huge strides in understanding the microbiology of wine. And so let's talk about Brettanomyces, for example. It's a yeast that gives an earthiness to wines. And it's to me it's the special sauce that makes Bordeaux profound. It's a little
mm-hmm.
bit like you know we got a Chinese restaurant down the street here that makes a garlic black bean eggplant dish.
Well, that sounds delicious.
It's earthy. It's full of
Mm-hmm.
animalia. It's just really soulful, and it's like this guy back in the kitchen that doesn't even speak English, and he's showing me
Uh-huh.
places in my soul that I didn't know existed. You know, well, I think most California winemakers got into the business because they had a wine like that. But now that they're having to feed their families and earn their salaries, they want to make clean wines. And so I'm afraid California wines are a little bit more like Kool-Aid. So there's a lot of sterile filtration and a lot of uh, doing everything they can to make fruity wines uh, that don't evolve, that don't age and acquire these uh, soulful characteristics. So I haven't sterile filtered a wine in 25 years. I really like the development that a wine can have in bottle, um, and it's risky, but if you know what you're doing and you can craft a wine so that it has a structure that integrates all those flavors, uh, just like that Chinese guy, if you know what you're doing, it doesn't come off as spoilage. It comes off as, a song to your soul. So
I love
uh,
songs
in
your soul.
California, we've kind of lost that.
Mm.
We're chicken shit about trying to make great wine. We just want to make good, clean wine. And I don't think we'll ever really appear on the world stage until we get over that.
That's interesting. You've worked with thousands of winemakers over the years,
Yes.
What's one lesson that you wish young winemakers today what is one lesson about wine that young winemakers today often have to rediscover the hard way?
There's a lot of consumers. I'm not sure what percentage,
Mm.
but they're very vocal. For example, the natural wine movement, uh, that don't trust winemakers. And
Uh-huh.
they don't trust winemakers because we really are lying sacks of shit.
Mm.
Um, and you know, when people came out to a winery in the 70s and 80s, they would see the stainless steel and the electricity and the refrigeration and didn't freak them out. It should have freaked them out because wineries were only just beginning to do that sort of stuff. But because you had all those things in your kitchen, you have stainless steel, you have refrigeration, you have electricity. So that didn't seem weird. But
Mm.
when we started getting into more sophisticated techniques, like some of the things I invented, like reverse osmosis to take out volatile acidity and reduce alcohol, or microoxygenation, uh, the wineries actually didn't really understand how it worked. And it didn't sound like, I don't know, there was this myth of manipulation that got started. And I think it was just because we weren't being upfront with people and saying, this is what I do. and I'm proud of it, and this is why I do it. Um, think about Wolfgang Puck gets on TV, okay, and he's going,
Mm-hmm.
I've got this gooey brie here, but I want to grate it so I can put it in my potatoes for my puff technology.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, but it's gooey, so I can't grate it. So I'm going to freeze it with liquid nitrogen. You want to watch? And he's doing all this high tech stuff and bragging about it. And that's what I think winemakers need to learn to do is don't do anything you don't want to brag about and then shout it from the rooftops because these guys work so hard and then they say, oh, I do the minimum.
Mm,
I'm not really doing anything. The wine makes itself in the vineyard, and it's bullshit. And I think
mm,
we disrespect ourselves when we do that. And really, there's no money in this business. So your
yeah.
honor is all you have, and we throw it away cheaply.
It's interesting because, the idea of taking credit for things and doing things that are really innovative. Like some of these people that I've met are just so humble. And like, oh, I don't do that much. I'm just barely, I just sit there but yet the reality is if you go into any winery, those winemakers are working their butts off, like from morning till evening. They are hammering away at
And they're sweating bullets in their dreams, thinking about
it
disease pressures and, what am I going to do about this and that? Yeah, they're on it all the time.
constantly. And, something as simple as the need to keep the room clean, everything clean, like these guys are hustling. And it's amazing to see how hard they work and the cool things that they are creating. Um so I wanted to ask this because you've written about ancient winemaking practices, including the Roman approaches to sulfite-free wines. Like, what did
Mhm.
early civilizations understand about wine that modern producers sometimes forget?
Well, the sulfite free thing is very interesting. It's impossible to have a sulfite allergy because the human body produces a gram per day. But the Romans, they called it blue smoke, and they used it. They had a primitive form of gunpowder, and they used it as an insecticide in orchards and stuff. They had it, but they didn't like the way it made wine taste. Had nothing to do with health, uh, but
Mhm.
they just uh, they, basically it would turn wine into what we think of now as conventional clean wine, uh,
Mm,
but without the soulfulness. And the best wines that I make are sulfite free, and they're just well. Here's the way to think about it. Let's say you're a centurion in Gaul, in some podunk village in Gaul. All right, and
mhm,
the centurion means you got 99 guys working for you, and everybody hates you.
mm,
So
right.
you invite the village elders over and you give them a steam bath and you give them some brick oven baked bread. You give them, like focaccia and some of these stinky cheeses, and you dip in the focaccia in the olive oil. No butter,
Uh,
because Attila the Hun can make butter. No beer, because anybody can make beer, but you give them this magical, whether it's a Syrah or, a, a sulfite free red wine that's just exploding with complexity. I don't know whether you like unpasteurized cheeses like Epoisse.
mm.
It's kind of like that. It's just, I mean, Epoisse really does smell like dog shit, but it's really good dog shit. You get 40
Right.
bucks a pound and happy to pay it. And it's like that. You just the complexity. and profundity in these wines, the guys are, you know, they're stumbling home and they say, well, maybe we won't stab them in their beds tonight. So basically, olive oil and uh, steam baths and wine were uh, sort of there were marks of civilization. You could only do it like it takes 10 years to get olive oil. You plant a
Uh-huh.
tree. Uh, so these are these are things that took the skill and the time of a stable civilization, and that's why the
Uh-huh.
Romans did it. They were they were they were trying to show the benefits of of civilization. And So anyway, that's what I don't label my sulfite free wines as sulfite free. I label them as the Roman Reserve, and that's why.
Roman Reserve. That's awesome
Yeah.
name, actually. One of the things too that like it shared some really interesting opinions. One of them was on Champagne. It's one of the most famous regions of wine in the world. You've argued that the region itself isn't actually well suited to making brut. Can you unpack that paradox a bit?
Yeah, Champagne's the worst wine in the world. Uh, you got to hand it to them, though.
Yeah.
See, what Dom Perignon figured out, people had been, as soon as we had bottles, people have been fermenting in the bottle. That wasn't the invention. What
Mm,
Dom Perignon found out is that you could put a shit ton of sugar in that wine and it wouldn't re-ferment because the CO2 suppresses the fermentation. And so uh, the court of Louis XIV, the Sun King, went nuts for these really sweet, highly acidic, still regular white wine made from champagne is searingly acidic and has no
mm,
flavor. It's totally bland and tart. It's horrible. But if you put a whole ton of sugar and some bubbles, well, now what you got is alcoholic Seven Up. And before atomic energy, we didn't have sterile filters until after World War II. So we didn't know how to make sweet wine except port and sherry and some of the real high sugar wines. But just for table wine, the only way to do it was with champagne, with the CO2 pressure that prevents re-fermentation. So that everything went along great. So we're talking about the sec, the dry champagne. That's what it means. Had 60 grams per liter of sugar. That's twice as much sugar as Sutter Home White Zinfandel. And then you had the demi-sec with 90 grams, and the doux with the sweet was 120 grams of sugar, 12% sugar. Really,
wow.
really sweet wines. And they were terrific. So
Hmm.
no problem. Then the British come along and around 1900, and they said, "Well, here now, we'd like a little less sugar." And the French said, "But it would taste terrible." I said, "Well, we'll give you pounds sterling if you do." "Very well. We'll take your English money, but we will not give it a beautiful French name like Demisec or Doux. We will call it an ugly English name. It sounds really bad in French. Extra
Hmm.
dry." And this is still 30 grams. So then
Hmm.
they came back and they said, "Well, we'd like it drier still. But only an animal would drink such wine." And that's where brut came from. It's an insult to the British palate that uh, that they would drink this horrible wine that was only suitable for animals. And that's where the word brut came from. But then
Mm.
you get the bomb, uh, which was all about Hitler scaring the pants off of every scientist and politician of the free world. Now we have atomic energy, and a German company called Nuclear learned how to put plastic sheets into the atomic piles and create little holes. So now we could filter out the yeast and keep table wines from exploding. So now all of a sudden we get these sweet Rieslings and White Zinfandel and all kinds of, everybody and his dog can make sweet wine now. So the French lost their edge to do that, and now 75% of champagne is brewed, even though by their own admission it's crap.
Hmm.
So what I like to do I think California uh, makes way better dry sparkling wine than France can because our grapes have flavor. So I make
Hmm.
a Santa Cruz Mountain Grenache that's brut zero. It doesn't have any dosage at all, but it's not. It's full of flavor and it doesn't have this searing acidity. And uh, I think California brutes are much better than the French wines. And
That's
the other
awesome.
guys that are really getting this right are the English.
Hmm.
So there's
How
a
so?
lot of scuttlebutt about how England makes better champagne than champagne does.
Well, wine has always been shaped by larger historical forces, like you mentioned wars and technology and economics. Is there a moment in history that you think quietly changed wine forever, but most people don't realize it?
Well, certainly the bomb,
Hmm.
uh, and of course, you got to look at electricity.
Yeah.
Um, Ben Franklin was the top electrical scientist of his era. And
Hmm.
he went to his deathbed proclaiming that there was no practical use for electricity. But now look at us. Yeah.
Yeah, right.
So that changed everything. And I mean, one of the things in my book is I say never trust anything with a power cord because the
Hmm.
problem is it gives you the power to do great ill.
Hmm.
When you got to do things by hand, you really give it some thought. Uh, One example, there's a chapter on the wine press.
Hmm.
You know, that you've got these vertical slats, and it was originally developed by the Romans for pressing olive oil.
Hmm.
So it worked fine for 2,000 years, and then around 1950 it stopped working.
Hmm.
And rather than to give it 5 minutes of thought to figure out what happened that changed that press into something that just didn't function, uh, that the problem was that the juice wouldn't couldn't travel. Pumice is kind of sticky and it doesn't have juice channels in it, and
Hmm.
uh, so what they did is they just threw electricity at the problem. They turned the basket uh, horizontal and put chains inside to beat up the pumice, uh, and then we had bladder presses and tank presses and all kinds of ways uh, of pressing the juice. When in fact the whole problem was that we had replaced the wooden bottom, which was porous,
Hmm.
with steel.
Hmm.
And so the juice isn't supposed to come out those slats. It's supposed to come out the bottom.
Hmm.
And really, 5 minutes reflection could have saved that. And finally, now we've gone back. Like if you go to Opus One, they've got the old presses, but they have juice channels in the floor. Uh,
Hmm.
and that's I don't know. Just anytime you can throw electricity at a problem rather than thinking about how it actually works, you're bound to cause some trouble.
Interesting. Well, and it leads to my next question because your upcoming book, The Myth of Science, challenges some deeply entrenched assumptions in winemaking. And What motivated you to start questioning those foundations?
Well, I got annoyed, I guess. You know, between MIT and UC Davis, I got a lot of stuff pounded into my head that it just ain't so.
Hmm.
Um, I'll give you an example, and this goes way beyond winemaking. Is you can't publish in a peer-reviewed journal unless your data passes some statistical tests uh, called hypothesis testing, um, or analysis of variance, or confidence intervals. You know, where you see like you're looking at data, and you have these, you know, histograms, these bars, and you say, well, this one's significantly higher than this one. And you'll have an A and a B, and these are both B's, and this is a C. And uh, all that hypothesis testing is based on a fallacious assumption. And
Hmm.
it just pissed me off that I had all this stuff pounded into my head, which again, if I had given it 5 minutes thought, or anybody else in the scientific world, they would have realized that it's just wrong. And
Hmm.
what's wrong, let me see if I can explain this. Let's say you got this new fertilizer and you want to find out whether it makes, say, corn plants grow taller. Okay,
Okay.
so you set up maybe you got a field over here and a field over here, or you can even take little pieces of each field and have a randomized block design. Anyway, you got the treatment and the controls. All right.
Okay.
So you go out and you measure uh, the heights of the control plants, and they're going to be kind of a bell curve. They're not all going to be
Yeah.
exactly the same, but they're going to have a mean, and some that are less and some that are more, and it's going to have a bell curve. And then you
Okay.
go to the treatment, and that's going to have a bell curve too, and you want to know whether they're different.
Mm.
Um, so you have to look at how they overlap.
Okay.
Uh, so far so good. Nothing wrong with that approach. But the problem is you need to know what the shape of the curve is. How is it tall and skinny, or is it, you know, is it wide and broad? And so that's measured by what's called the standard deviation. It's basically the measure of the shoulder of the bell curve. Okay.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And that's fine too. The fallacy is if you try to use your data as an estimator of the actual standard deviation.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what they taught us in school, and it's just not true. And in fact, this was made up by a bunch of eugenicists back around 1900, Pearson and Student, and there's four of them, Gossett, uh, and uh, they were using this mathematical variation to prove the inferiority of races that they didn't like, and
Bah.
they were trying to justify the sterilization of like Southern Europeans and blacks, and uh, actually, Teddy Roosevelt was a big eugenicist, and so was uh, 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 George Bernard Shaw. This is pretty popular until Hitler came along and actually decided to, actually do something about it. And so eugenics is definitely out of favor now, but we're still using the frequentist interpretation. Now, let me give you an example. Let's say I've got a deck of cards here and I turn one of them over, it's a spade. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So that's one chance in four. Now I turn another one over, and that's a spade too. So then I keep turning them over, and every time I turn a card, I get another denomination of spade. Now I've got 13 spades. Now the
Hmm.
frequentist will tell you that it's almost a certainty that the 14th card will also be a spade.
Okay.
That's the frequentist interpretation. But if you know anything about cards, you know that that's all the spades there are. And so actually the chances that a 14th card is a spade is exactly zero.
Okay.
So that's called a Bayesian inference. And that's the war that's going on right now. There's something called the crisis of non-reproducibility. All
Hmm.
these, millions of scientific papers with studies that can't be reproduced because they're using statistics that aren't valid. So,
That's wild.
you know, I find this 50 years into my career and it pissed me off. Uh, I feel like the credibility of science is not going so well. Kind of relates to what I was talking about winemakers not being honest about what they're actually doing. The arrogance of scientists, climate scientists, doctors, uh, is well known, and people don't trust them anymore. So
Hmm.
uh, the book is really it, it's not an indictment. It's just the subtitle is a winemaker recommends repairs, and I
Interesting.
think if scientists can just realize that a lot of you may be the world's greatest expert on this particular species of beetle, but if
Uh,
you're honest, everything else you think you know about science, you're just taking somebody else's word for it. And a lot of it just isn't true. But that's just good news, because if you can get to that point, then you can start talking about your work with humility. As a climatologist, just report the facts. The second
okay.
you become an activist, you take a position about what other people should be doing, you're gonna end up with some peculiar political occurrences when scientists are no longer respected because you're asking tens of millions of people, coal miners and roughnecks, uh, to go find another job, and the billionaires that own those coal mines and those oil rigs, they're not going to like you very much either. But if you could just stick to, here's what my data says. David Hume used to talk about the second you go from what is to what ought to be, you cease to be a scientist. So I
Hmm.
think a little humility gives us a way to reach across the aisle and work together to get us out of the fix we're in. You know, most Americans believe that there's something goofy going on with the climate. It's kind of hard to ignore. What they don't agree with is whether or not it's human caused.
Hmm.
Who cares? Who cares who shot John? It's a childish argument. Let's just, as long as we believe that we got a problem, let's work together to fix it.
Yeah. You know, it's interesting to me because I I am not a scientist and I do not have all these answers. And one of the things that's interesting though is I have seen people use, and I mean using um the information that they have at their disposal to push an agenda. And I mean, I'm
Right.
sure that in whatever arena that you're looking at, that can be a truth as well. And I think that um, when you have something that, for me, I am a huge fan of, I love all things analog. And I love, I started as I'm a video maker, filmmaker, content creator, but I still my core passion is with film photography. I love taking pictures with film. And one of the things with that is there is an art and a science to it, but yet there's also this um there's a certain amount of mix of chemicals that you need. There's a certain it's definitely science, to develop the film. But at the same time, you if we were to perfectly refine that process down and make it so that every single roll was perfect. And one of the craziest things that's so beautiful is when I am a dumbass and I open up the back of my camera and I don't realize there's film still in there. And oh my God, I slam it shut. Those light leaks create some of the most beautiful images that you could imagine. And
Yeah,
sometimes the
serendipity.
mistakes, yep,
Yeah.
sometimes those mistakes that we make turn into absolute magic. And I think that's one of the things that I'm pulling from this, that we have to make sure that there's still room for the human nature of things. Because I mean, again, I'm also worried about, the rise of AI and winemaking, that, oh, well, we've got this new process that will completely do everything for you. It's completely automated. And, for me, I'm want to keep the human in everything, whether that be winemaking, whether that be consulting, whether that be sharing content. Like, my God, the number of people that are making content now that are just using AI generated scripts to spam people. I don't need that. You don't need
Yeah.
that. None of us need that. But for
Well, I
someone
think
who's,
the
go ahead.
AI is like if you had a California high school education, you probably can't spell your way out of a brown paper bag. And so then, AI could help you to write, proper grammar. But
Right.
when I write, uh, you can tell that I'm not an AI. For one thing, I have a
Mm-hmm.
sense of humor. Uh,
Yeah.
and I think we're going to get much better at discerning the difference between AI generated text and actual good writing. And I think that's a good thing.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but let's go back to language just a little bit here. All the things you were talking about film, that's not science. That's technology.
Mm,
Science is a realm of inquiry. Science, engineering is about getting things done whether you understand them or not. Science is a realm of not knowing.
mm,
And Einstein used to say the reason we call it research is we don't know what we're doing. So I think we get all those, technology, engineering. This is a whole chapter in my book. It's just trying to clarify the language of what science is anyway.
that's awesome. Well, I wanted to ask you this, because for someone that's just beginning their journey in winemaking, what mindset or philosophy would you hope they bring to the craft?
That's a good question. Um, I think the biggest mistake I ever made was to go to college right after high school.
Hmm.
College is not a place where you find your métier, your career. So I my best piece of advice is get out in the world. Um, as a winemaker traveling to Europe, but also Australia and South Africa. Get out there. Sign up for a hitch with a bunch of wineries and spend two
Yeah.
or 3 years. Uh, and that's where you're going to get your artistic vision from. You're not going to get it in school. Uh, and then Uh, I don't know. I really don't think UC Davis turned me into a winemaker. It
Hmm.
it turned me into a well-educated scientist, although many of the things they taught me aren't really useful or even true. Um, but it certainly didn't teach me how to make wine.
Hmm.
When I was there, they weren't even tasting wine. The whole 4-year program, there were no classes in tasting wine. I had to start
Wow.
one in the experimental college. Uh, they definitely churn out qualified, technicians, but and in fact the 1880 act of the state legislature that established the Department of Viticulture and Enology uh, directed them to teach uh, the art and science of winemaking, but that's not what they do.
Hmm.
It'd be like if you went to Juilliard and all they ever did was talk about amplitudes and frequencies, and you never got to play the piano.
Right. Well, that leads to my last question. If you're pouring 3 glasses right now, what 3 glasses are you pouring for me?
Well, we did this on sound check in New York. We poured 3 glasses of wine for the host, uh, and asked him to comment on them. And he said, "Well,
Hmm.
this one is really fruity and round and smooth, and then this next one is kind of harsh and bitter, and so he described 3 completely different wines, and we thought these are all the same wine. All
Wow.
we did was to change the background music you were listening to when you were tasting
Hmm.
those wines. It's on my site. If you go to whoisclarksmith.com and click on wine and music, there's a whole a bunch of NPR things and stuff that look for the sound check, and that might be one way to do it. I'm not sure that was what you meant. Um,
It's all good. Where can people go to find out more about you and what you do?
well, whoisclarksmith.com is kind of the clearinghouse. There's uh, if you click on shop, and that's where you can buy my wines. Wine and music take you to my other book. You click on postmodern winemaking. There's a whole site about uh, about that philosophy. Uh, and I do a lot of consulting, so there's a consulting website, and then there are courses. If you'd like to skip the whole 4-year enology program and just take my one weekend class, I can basically give you everything you really need to know that you would get out of a 4-year program in 88 10-minute segments over the course of a weekend. That's
That's
probably the
awesome.
best place to start. I also have a YouTube channel that's got all kinds of fun stuff on it. Uh, that's Winesmith One, the digit one.